Hey, Jess.
Hello. You're getting in the way.
Hello again. And
Hey. How was CSI? CSI. EIS. It was good. Cool.
Yeah, it was good.
Nice. Hey,
Hello?
Greg. Hey, Greg.
How's it going?
Good, good. How are you?
Doing well.
Awesome.
so I totally screwed up my weekly crawl of the EPA yesterday or this morning by accidentally overwriting the file. And so I'm now crawling it again. You can see, I don't know if you guys can see that. That's the EPA showing up somewhere. It's really dumb. I'm an idiot.
How long does that crawl usually take?
Somewhere between 18 and 22 hours.
Oh, all right. That's quick.
Yeah. It really depends on the traffic on the rest of the site because it'll throttle me sort of randomly. Right now we're sitting at like one request a minute at the moment. It'll bump back up in a bit.
Is that running off of your laptop there, or is it on like a Colud server?
For now, it's just on my machine. I have to fix some bugs where it consumes way too much memory. But it should be there in a bit.
Okay.
I don't know, Brendan, have you met Greg yet?
I think we've met. Greg, I think you were on the call. I don't think I was on the call last week, but 2 weeks ago.
We had some like brief interactions, but it was like 20 seconds.
Okay.
Totally.
Cool.
It's very exciting to have new faces around or new email addresses.
New fonts, yes.
Yeah, Greg's been super helpful looking at some of the DB stuff, and he has some experience in Ansible too. So DevOps is always, fun and something good to talk about. Has anyone seen Toli online today? I'll quickly ping him. I don't see him online in Slack. Oh, yes, he is online in Slack.
I think he's here, right?
Like too many screens, too many windows. Awesome. Hey, Toli. So let's see. I don't think Kevin's joining us today, so I think this is everyone, but still nice to see many windows. Let me share my screen and the agenda, and we can just sort of start going through it. Okay. Can people see that? Yes. Cool. So awesome. Just some couple quick updates. One is I went to the Ethics in Web Archiving conference, which was really interesting and useful, and got to meet Jess in real life, which was also super fun, and found out that archivists are a super fun bunch. Who knew? And also there, I met someone who is working on the DocNow project, Document the Now project, who is localish. He's in New Jersey, but he does basically automation and Ansible DevOps stuff for Princeton, at Princeton Library. And he said he would take a look at our stuff. He has some spare cycles. I don't know how many that means, but that's awesome. I know, Greg has some experience in that too. I think the next step is, I don't know exactly how we can share Dan's private repo, but I thought that might be a next step. So
Just Just a quick question, Ray, about
Sure.
the archive and ethics. Is there any resources I could go and look at that if I wanted to learn more myself?
Yeah, I can send you a link to the conference. And I think all the main talks they were live streamed. I'm presuming, since it was an archiving conference, that the talks will be made available afterwards.
They're all available, Ray.
Already?
Yeah,
Okay.
Awesome.
unfortunately.
I presented to a workshop that was very sparsely attended, which wasn't recorded. But there was a UX guy there who saw a scanner and was like, wow, this is basically said this is a real thing. And I'm like, yes, it's a real thing. So +1 kudos to everyone involved in that. And it was good to be there just to sort of, have an edgy presence there, I thought. I can give a longer retrospective on that later if anyone's interested. But then also there were some interesting talks there's a Fidelity panel with this security person who did some interesting papers on being able to mess with web archives by if a domain is down, but the Internet Archive used to be able to pull third-party domains into the content, and if you could take over something like that, you could serve potentially malicious content, stuff like that. It was pretty interesting. So it had the whole wide gambit from stuff like that to social scientists and activists and everything like that. I can get you links to some of that stuff too, Greg. And
Awesome,
so,
thank you.
Yep, for sure. So we can also follow up with this DevOps guy and figure out what the next steps are, just to be able to show him some stuff. It just, I didn't know if it was one, how to go about sharing a private repo, and two, if that was a good idea with someone. I mean, he works closely with Ed Summers, so I feel like he's, a good guy, but, also, it's private for a reason. So I just wanted to make sure that we're just sharing things properly. And then also I just wanted to mention,
you even have permission to share it because it's owned by Dan, not by Edgy.
Yeah, so no, I don't. But even before asking for that, I just wanted to make sure that we understood I understood what we would be potentially exposing by sharing someone not in Edgy to that repo. And then also, I've been talking to PatCon a little bit. He is working with Lourdes on some sort of just larger onboarding of Edgy, sort of rethinking for just anyone who sort of comes to Edgy and how to navigate the organization, which I think can be challenging. And I've been talking to him about sort of web monitoring specific experiences. And that's been an interesting conversation with him. He mentioned that Public Lab was having a community call yesterday, which I was able to join in the afternoon, and it was sort of on community and onboarding. And they actually had someone from the Python Software Foundation, a consultant, and she was there to basically talk about the upgrade to PyPI and packaging like that, which is pretty cool just to hear about. But then when I found out what she actually did, I was like, I would love to talk to you about how she consults to open source communities. And so I'm trying to schedule a call with her later, in the week, maybe just to see what she sort of does. And then also, I don't know if there's potentially ever a way for her to work with us in a more formal way. I know we do have some money coming in. I haven't broached her any about that. It would just be interesting to see what kinds of stuff she does. But it was pretty cool to have someone talk about PyPI. There's nothing for us specifically to do. If you are putting in packages now, they're going to both. And I think they were saying it's in beta now, and eventually, in the short term, I think they're hoping for somewhere around the launch of PyCon, the big conference, to turn off the old legacy PyPI. So it was pretty interesting to hear about.
It would be wonderful because that bit has been up forever and it's so nice compared to the current production PyPI, which is terrible.
It's old. It's old.
Utterly terrible.
It
was terrible even when it was new, in my opinion.
Okay.
It's not a good.
I wasn't around those days, so I will take your word for it, Rob. But I think all accounts is no one will shed a tear when they turn legacy PyPI off. Also, Brendan, Rico reached out to me just to connect with him. I think we're going to talk later today, just to align, because I know Query has, there's always been interest, but there's sort of renewed, increased interest in the web monitoring collaboration. So we just want to sort of sync and make sure that, we both, have a better understanding of what we're working on and things like that. I'll report back how that goes. And two quick things. One is, I'm assuming the Packard money is coming through too, so we should start rolling out, role descriptions for the project lead, and then also the developer needs that we need. And some of that has always been, especially for the developer needs, has been in flux based on the development we've been able to do. But I think sort of things are getting more clear. Hopefully, I think Rob will also be able to shed a light on it, because I think there's been some really interesting repo updates on the inner archive stuff, which is really exciting. And to go along with that, I'm wondering if there were some questions in some of your new issues, Rob, and you were asking sort of open-ended questions, but then sometimes you added, Dan, Kevin, and I, and I'm wondering if we, based on they're available too, because I know both of them are a little out of pocket, do we need to have a larger discussion about some of these open questions you have, and if that would be useful to you, just to sort of hash them out?
Well, so those are in the agenda here too, but the ones
Okay.
I tagged people on because I will not do anything without getting at least some feedback, because those are big deal changes.
Right.
But I think they're also really, really, really important.
Okay. That is great. And I definitely don't think, I totally agree with your assessment that you don't want to start work on something big without consensus by the group on the direction you take.
And to be clear, they're not necessarily big in effort. Most of them are very tiny in effort.
Okay.
They are big in impact.
Okay.
Like everything that uses the database may be impacted or changed or broken by the decisions made there.
Okay.
Technologically, they are mostly small.
Okay.
But they are ones with many possible paths, and any given path may have a pretty big impact on what it means for what's in the database or how you get things out of the database.
Right. So there would be like there are potentially implications about the path we take too for the future, so that, it sets us down in a direction. Okay, that's great. So would a separate conversation just to talk that stuff through be helpful, or do you think we should?
No, because everybody's all over the place right now. So I mainly want to highlight that we need feedback. And so anybody who's interested or adjacent to the project or heavily involved, if you're heavily involved, please provide some feedback, even if it just sounds good. And if you are adjacent or interested or have poked at the database or anything, it would be very helpful to hear feedback.
Okay.
So can I ask a quick clarifying point? Maybe I missed something, but I get it's about the database. Is there more scope that you can provide?
It's in the agenda later.
Yeah.
I'll talk specifics later.
Okay. So on that note, that's all I had to say. Totally, do you want to give a quick update on analysts stuff, and then we can dive into the dev stuff?
Sure. So analyst work, I don't know if any of you were at the last meeting on Monday, but I'm personally overwhelmed by the amount of significant changes that we are finding that we need to be reporting out. This particular week, we found a lot of important ones that are high priority, and so I'm excited that many of the analysts are kind of taking it up on themselves to explore the different avenues and the changes. So we're seeing things that at BLM, Bureau of Land Management, and EPA in particular. Other than that, there are still, I believe, 4 reports in progress, and the research team convened a meeting yesterday. We're writing a public comment to the Clean Power Plan proposed repeal, which is, from our perspective, we're contributing the evidence that the process of the repeal process is being done essentially unethically, that information was removed that could have been used others could have used to provide comment before and during the comment period. So that's the argument we're making, laying out the kind of fact that there was a bunch of access reduction. And I believe relevant for this group, Eric Noss might be doing some link analysis for that work. So actually, Brendan, I don't know how easy it is. If you already just have a dump of data that's like all the links, internal links within the EPA site, then if we can make the argument that there are no links from the current EPA site to the Clean Power Plan archived website, then we could say you're totally obfuscating, obscuring the fact that this website, whether, there are obviously links to the January 19th snapshot, but nothing directing to the fact that there was an existing Clean Power Plan website. And if we can make that point, holistically, it's sort of it's a cherry on top. It's not like we won and the EPA lost or something, but it is a really strong statement we can make. So I don't know how easy that is for you to get, Brendan, but you should connect with Eric if that's possible.
Yeah, it's more than a cherry on top.
Yeah, 100%. Because I was just before you got here, I screwed up. I accidentally overwrote my crawl from last night, and but I was watching the crawl happen last night, and the site looks dramatically different. Like there are just massive changes. Like the number of links per page is like half. I don't know what they've done, but like something is like. I'm very glad we have a snapshot from like 2 or 3 weeks ago prior to some of this stuff. And so we already have some basis. I'd be happy to send along this file as soon as it's finished. And the prior one is ASAP. Yeah, and so let's get that rock and rolling. But yeah, it's kind of not good by the look of it. I don't know. I don't want to sound alarmist, but as far as I can tell, it looks really different. The site looks very, very different.
Yeah, I mean, different isn't always
bad. Yeah.
But I think we have some particular examples that we can point to.
Well, yeah, like just to give you a feel, like the last crawl was, the first one when it was finished, the raw uncleaned file was about 600 megs after about 18 hours. This one after about 12 hours, it was like 215 megs, and it wasn't finished. So it's not even generating just this pure size count on the thing seems smaller by a lot.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we know they're removing stuff. So yeah, it would be good to get quantitative. But yeah, the timeline on that is we're hoping to have Eric's working on this now, and we're hoping to have a rough draft of the comment by next Friday. So we have like 10 days or so to get something.
All right. Yeah. So yeah, I'll get this over as soon as we can. We'll add it after this call. We'll figure something out.
Excellent. Thank you both. Anything else, Toli? That seemed like a lot, so you don't have to make anything up. Okay, so developer updates in progress for me. Thanks for those extensive comments, Rob. Super helpful. I've worked my way through most of them. I just have some formatting stuff I want to clean up, and then I'll try to do a PR as quickly as possible. But everything basically made sense, so thanks for that. And then I'll try to finish. I got delayed by the conference, but I'll try to finish archiving those meeting notes and push along the best practices stuff that's we've been working on too. Yes, Rob, do you want to pick it up?
Sure. So a whole bunch of random things got done last week. Some worth highlighting. We increased the redirect limit when we're archiving things because now that we're pulling in stuff from Internet Archive. So the redirect limit used to be 5. But surprisingly, a lot of the stuff that we're now getting, we didn't have to worry about it before because we never actually archived anything. Because we just left versionista stuff in place because the scraper already archived it. But now the archiver is actually running to pull in stuff and make our own copy of what we get from Internet Archive, just for easier, quicker access. And it turns out that it's not uncommon for any given URL that we are monitoring from EPA or wherever to have more than 5 redirects between the URL and the ultimate destination, which is crazy. But so I upped it to 10, and it doesn't seem to have been having import problems on redirects anymore. Happily, like our whole tool chain does a great job of like saying, oh, this version row like had too many redirects and we didn't pull it in. So it's super easy to diagnose that problem in a simple fix. But worth noting, just so like we're aware, like that's the level probably related to all the sort of reorganization going on EPA, because that probably has created a lot more redirects. So worth knowing that that is happening. Although I don't think it's too big a deal that we had to increase that limit. If somebody thinks for some reason that limit's too low, let me know. We finally fixed all the versionista metadata and all the old bad hashes. We did that in one run. The script that does that is sitting on as a gist because it's really just a one-off script. But if anybody was curious or wants to copy paste pieces of it to do bulk analyses of anything in our database and overall content, it's super easy to copy and paste parts from. It looks long, but only the first like quarter of it is actual program code. The rest is just like utilities for working with streams and other shit, because it's a total standalone script. And we have automatic Docker image publishing for UI now, so both DB and UI do that. And soon I'll get back around to doing that in processing, but we have bigger problems. That script for bulk importing from Internet Archive, which is part of processing. So instead of saying, import me all the versions of this page in this date range, we can say import all the versions of all the pages we know about in the DB. That is, I think it might have been pending review several days ago. And so probably I just need to merge it now because nobody's actually going to review it. So that just needs to be merged in. And the thing that I just added the other day, so as I did that, one of the things I did is now that we have all of the other stuff that we thought was technically in the way of making it really easy to reliably import things from Internet Archive, I went through all the on deck, the spreadsheet that has all the on deck reports that people are working on. And I just took every page listed in there and imported the entire history from Internet Archive into our database. So probably analysts, as they're working, will suddenly notice that things we had 30 versions of, now we have 400 versions of. And that happily highlighted a bunch of small issues. We with versionista are careful to rate limit ourselves and provide a whole bunch of knobs for how fast we hit versionista and have retries and backoffs when occasionally the server says stop. And we didn't have any of that for Internet Archive, so I added some really simple, a little decorator and a wrapper function so that it's very low impact to add that to anything, but we added it to where we touch Internet Archive when we're importing and processing. So there's a PR for that. That's just general good behavior, but if people have thoughts on what the right defaults are, right now the default is super slow. It's 2 requests a second. And the back off, it'll retry up to 3 times, and the back off it's a multiplicative back off. So I think it's like 6 seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds between each retry. But that's totally adjustable. So if people have thoughts on what a better default back off would be, post in there. So those are the things that sort of pending review. Up next is other stuff related to things I uncovered during that IA import, which is we need to do similar things on the DB side. Since we haven't really been having that archiver actually archive stuff because our scraping and importing tools do that before anything ever gets to the database. This is the first time that started to really heavily get exercised. So we need to do that same back off on the DB side. Also on the DB side, if you send a hash, but not a URL for content that's an allowed host, so we have to like re-download the content. We don't use the hash you sent to validate what we downloaded, which is bad. Like, that seems like we ought to make use of that. Instead, we just download the content and recalculate the hash and throw out the hash that you gave us. So we should flip that around for safety and for verification. And that'll help us. So even if the back off and everything else fails, that'll help us make sure that we got the content we were supposed to get. So it'll be the final backstop there. So that's super, super easy to add. And I just need to do it. That's probably like 30 minutes of work. It'll be more work to write the test than to do the change. And yeah, and retrying on the archiver. So all that same stuff on the archiving side in our database. And then there's the 3 issues that are like big discussion topics that are changes to the API, which I should let everybody else finish their updates, and then I can talk about those more, or people can just click the links if we don't have time.
That's great. Let's see if we can squeeze in at least some conversation about that, I think, because it's important. But one quick question I do have, and if it's a longer conversation, we can take it offline too, is now that we're pulling stuff from Inner Archive, is there help and testing that, like, from a user standpoint that you'd like us to do? Or are there performance questions you have? How's it going? Like, just, you know, how can we help you make sure that, you know, we move this process along? Because I know we've all been sort of eager to get this work completed.
I mean, if anybody wants a tour through the code so they can sanity check all the parts of it, I'm happy to do so. Otherwise, we've been importing from IA for a long time, just ad hoc, me running my scripts. So I'm not super worried about it. I don't know really from like a user perspective, as we have more IA data, if there's things you feel like are somehow less clear because there's not really the fallbacks you have for Versionista or something else in UI, like that would be good to know. But we've had some amount of IA data for a long time.
Right.
So I mean, I'm not sure that's like those issues will become more salient now that we have more IA data, but they're not related to this part of the stack, which is about how do we flow things through.
Right. Cool. Sounds good. That's helpful to know. Great. Greg.
Yes.
I know you've been working on stuff too.
Yes, smaller things. I've mostly been trolling around through the DB schema and all the various relationships between the models in the database. Other than that, I quickly threw together the allowed hosts that I did last week, cleaned it up, and then just threw up a pull request. Started looking at Rob's pull requests, specifically the one with the null posting and validation, and trying to figure for annotations. So I'm going to try to do better about just handling pull requests and giving some review in second eyes. Though for the whole streaming of data, I have some good ideas for how to handle that, but I want to make sure I'm understanding everybody else's earlier designs first.
Cool.
Sure, that makes sense. Any blockers or questions?
No, Rob helped a lot with the one problem I had with the tests, and now it's not a problem thanks to that really weird sorting issue. And so now the tests are reliable to me, so I can start moving with other things.
That sounds awesome. Thanks, Greg. Yeah, and just quickly, Colleen and I have a new draft of this acceptable use policy, which is from the Cyberlaw Clinic. We'll be reviewing that and sort of pushing that process along. I know it's 2:30, but if people have a few more extra minutes, Rob, did you want to discuss those 3 points? I don't know how much time you wanted, if it's worth it or not. I've got time.
I have 15 minutes if people want to go through it.
Sure, let's do it.
Okay. So I guess just one by one. So the first one is remove the include versions parameter from the pages route. So if you're getting a list of pages, we have a parameter that is include latest, which means every page object also includes the most recent captured version object as a sub-object. And there's also include versions, where every page object includes all its versions. I think originally we expected that we probably weren't going to be importing the full histories of things from Internet Archive, and it wasn't a big deal. It'd be a long time before like that got to be a scaling problem. I think now that is a real scaling problem, and that is not a tenable feature for the database to have. It's problematic if you ask for a chunk of 100 pages at a time and each one has 10 versions. It's really problematic if each one has 100 versions, because now that response has gotten huge. And if each one has more than that, it will eat potentially too much memory on the server. It'll be a really big response, and it will potentially eat a huge amount of money on you, the client, who's asking for that data that might not be relevant. So I think the right path, now that we have, or will soon have, lots of versions for every page, is to force people to use the paged chunked access API for listing versions. So I think we need to turn off that feature where you can just say, when I get a list of pages, also give me all the versions attached to them. The thing that we could alternately do is keep that around, but have it just be like, say, the most recent 10 or something, if that's a really valuable feature for people. And that similarly goes for if you get the single page record. So if you get pages/ID, that also returns to you because we've found it very useful, a full list of all the versions in the page. For the same reasons, that needs to go away. It's less impactful and less of a big deal because you're not doing that times 100 for like a whole bunch of pages. But it's still a problem if there's a page with 500 versions or 1,000 versions. You're getting way more data than you potentially want. And there's actually no way to turn that one off. It's just like, we thought this would be useful, so we're giving it to you. So maybe we could keep it around as a additional parameter, but the same as in the listing, it would need to be necessarily limited to like the most recent or earliest 10 or something. So I think better would be to throw that away. A potentially useful functionality we could replace it with is to include the latest and the earliest captured version for the page. But we could also just have those as parameters like they are in the page listing that says, don't give me just the page, give me its latest version and its earliest version. So there's potential to discuss about like what the right routes and alternatives and tools to replace the things we need to remove are. That second one, removing the list of versions from the individual page details route, is a big, big deal because the UI uses it. The UI is happy to be naive and just say, I'm going to ask for the page, and that's going to come with all its versions, and then I can be done worrying about like the timeline for this page. I'll just present everything that I got from there, and it doesn't do anymore. And now we're getting to a size where that's no longer like a feasible approach and assumption. So the UI will also need to be reworked heavily to not be that naive about how it loads timelines for a page. Yes. I think you.
Yeah. I'm just slow with the mouse on the draw. So that's really interesting because this might not, I don't know how to grapple with this, but it seems like in prior versions, I understand some of them will be quite old, maybe even as long as the Internet Archive has been in existence. And we're sort of interested in, particularly like obviously the switch over between the last two administrations, and maybe other administrations too seem like useful pinpoints in time instead of like every version. So I don't know if that's one, like an easy way to get to that. And then two, is that something useful that we would want to display? But that seems like we like, I don't know if like the last 10 would be useful, but I know there are these highlighted points within time that are a little more specific that would be useful.
There is already an issue discussing specifically that. Once we have long time frames, what are better tools both under the hood in the API and in the UI that we can use to navigate it? So it included stuff like, should we just make auto available, like we know interesting points in time, so we can say like administrations, or do we need to make available like some user bookmarking functionality where people can make points in time and have the tools automatically highlight those in the UI in some way? But there is an issue for discussing that. I'm not sure if it's on UI, DB, or on the web monitoring umbrella project.
Okay. But yeah, maybe we can think about those things in tandem because one will give insight to the other when that selection process happens.
Well, I mean, I think the question of like how you get at, or how the API presents, or where it presents or does not present a long list of versions it's not 100% unrelated, but it's like 95% unrelated.
Right.
Like that's more like technical thing that we need to do because the current approach makes it easy to like destroy the server and possibly yourself, not realizing how much you're asking for.
Right. We want to, definitely help people not make dumb mistakes.
Yeah.
Or not allow them to make.
As far as the routes, the API and the routes API, do we have anything that defines the API, like a schema or like a GraphQL document or anything like that?
Yes, there is a swagger.yaml, and if you just go to the API in your browser, it renders for you nicely so you can browse it as documentation.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Yeah, so I'm not sure I followed all of the decision points along the way, but I guess I agree with Ray that, and clearly this has been thought about. There's an issue that particular milestones probably a good way to think about things, but I think it also depends on like whether we like give functionality to users when they're like on a page to pull in like directly from IA in that moment, or something like that. That might actually change the whole. Well, that would change a lot about how I think about whether, like how the UI presents things. And I'm sure I'm just like not wrapping my mind around it and said something dumb already. But anyway, I'm happy to have this conversation.
Well, what we're doing right now, and we're on the path of, is that everything that Internet Archive has for the pages that we care about will be presented exactly the same. It's in the pull downs and everything as the Versionista stuff. So if you think that is not a good approach, or if it's like an overload, and instead we need to not present all that stuff and give users an option to say, what does IA have for this? And then click a button that says, also pull these ones in. That would be good to know. But the working assumption was that it would be easier if it were just there.
Yeah, so I guess that I was assuming that you're saying there's a scaling problem to just pull, because I mean, it depends on the page, right? Because some of the pages are checked every day, and you don't want to pull that in. I mean, and I don't know exactly, because I don't know if we're doing like storing differential versions, and it may be like it's actually not that big of a deal, and then the memory isn't as doesn't scale like linearly with. Well, it actually might scale linearly still, but Mike, yeah, I can see there being like an inflection point where it's like if the frequency of snapshots per month is like above something, then like pull in every third, or like some kind of weeding out that we do that, like, so we can control how the thing scales. I don't know, is that a thing that you're thinking about, or you don't even think that's an issue? Because if it's not an issue, then sure, let's pull everything in. And then I think it's just a question of how you present it to the user, because it's overwhelming to have to scroll through like 100 things. Or it could literally be two, like the same kind of interface, like two panels instead of one. You know how the IA presents the calendar view, like just like one strip. It could just be two of those, and that might be a nice intuitive way to do it too.
Yeah. So there's kind of three things there. So the first one is the technical impact of just pulling in that much data, especially because we're not tracking a huge number of pages. It's only like 30,000. Pulling in all those versions is not that big a deal. Where it's costly is not so much in the metadata we put in the database, but in storing the raw content. And there's an easy solution to that, which is don't pull in the raw content. Just make Internet Archive an allowed host, where we just point to it offsite instead of keeping our own copy. The second thing is the scaling problem of the API, which is really what this issue is mainly about. And there's two things in there that you identified, and one of them is the question of like, are there versions that we could not import for one reason or another? And an aspect of that is in the next two issues that we have to talk about. The other one is like, would this be less of a problem if we didn't have so much from Internet Archive? And it sort of would be, but it would be more like delaying the problem. We'd still have to answer these questions later, because we would still eventually accumulate a lot. Because I think everybody wants to ultimately see this as like a broader public platform, and all that other sort of stuff. So like in theory, it's a longer running project than just like the next year. So we will necessarily get there eventually. And I think it's better to make a massive change to the API to support that oncoming change now that we know what it looks like now than later. And also, there are still quite a few pages where every snapshot is different because it serves up ever so slightly different content every time you ask for it. And we see that with some of them in Versionista, and it's a pain for analysts to deal with. And that's more about getting our automatic analysis tools working and providing something better than the hashes. And with those pages, we're going to get to this problem straight away anyway, because Internet Archive checks the page reliably every day, and much more reliably even though it occasionally falls over and it dies, it's still more reliable than the everyday or every other day from Versionista, where occasionally there are very unaccounted for month-long gaps, like that one in chat the other day. I don't know what the deal is there. But now that we have the Internet Archive data solved. And then the last one is this potentially creates like a user interface overload where there's too much stuff. And I think you are like angling in the right direction with some of the things you proposed. There's also that long-standing, probably doesn't work anymore because it's so far out of date, PR for me creating an alternative, more timeline-like interface. And probably we need to, now that we're going to have a lot more content, come back around and bring that back to life, and make that the way to handle this problem, or see if that's a way that better handles it. And I think that is also outside the scope of the technical issue here, which is like, what does the API need to do to handle the feature where there's just too many versions of a page to serve up every time?
Cool. So I know it's quarter of, and you had a hard stop, Rob. With these other two issues, what's the best way to proceed? Should we just individually then take a look at them and start responding to them in the original repo, or did you want to say something super quick about them now?
Let me say something super quick, and then people please read over them and respond in the repo.
And I'll help nudge.
Okay. So the first one is, well, they're both about the importing API. So one of the problems with Internet Archive is that if we have 30,000 pages now that we care about, that means if we update our database from Internet Archive once a day, we have to ask Internet Archive 30,000 times, you got any updates for this page? You got any updates for this page? You got any updates for this page? So to be more efficient, the way I wrote the bulk importing script is we ask our database for all the pages, which we can do in a few seconds, and then we collate that into a list of domains, and we ask Internet Archive, what are all the changes that happened in this domain in the last day or 2 days or whatever the time frame is. However, that means once we have all those changes, we have to filter out the ones that are pages we don't care to track right now. There's probably like a farther future where we just want to pull all of those in, but for now, we're going to reduce strain by not pulling them all. The problem is we can't just say, I got this URL and I'm tracking these URLs in the database. Does this URL match exactly? Because that's why we had to add all the canonicalization stuff, because a URL that we know we're tracking might correspond to 4 or 5 actual URLs on the internet in the archive in practice. The very poor way that it's currently solved in the bulk importing script is we use our canonicalized version of that URL, called the URL key, and match that against the one we got from Internet Archive. That works because our method of canonicalization is the same format and mainly follows the same rules. There are probably some places where it differs slightly, and you have to assume that it will necessarily, at various times, differ. Maybe we'll change our algorithm because Internet Archive's not our only source, and we might have new things that we learn. Maybe Internet Archive will change their algorithm in the future for canonicalizing. So they will necessarily, at some point in time, become even less in sync than they are now. So that's not a good long-term solution. So I think the answer is that filtering actually needs to happen as the database is processing all the versions you want to import. So we should take all those pages and send them to the database. And it should be up to, you should be able to tell the database, don't create a new page for anything in this import. Because its current behavior is to say, got a whole bunch of version records. If I don't have a page that corresponds to that version, make one. and add that version to it. So what we need is to switch to say, hey, if you're going to create a new page, don't do it, and just throw out this version. So we already have a sort of import as a block level behavior switch, which is if you're getting a version that you already know about, do you throw it away? Do you merge it with the known version, or do you replace the known version? So we already have a paradigm for having this kind of switch for all the versions you're asking to import at a time. So this is basically just saying we need a way to say, don't create new pages as a result of this import. Ignore the versions that don't have a corresponding already existing page in the database. And then the other one is a slightly different take on a similar thing, which is our general contract in the database is we try and only store versions that are different from the previous version. But with Internet Archive, it's not super easy for us to do that because the way they hash versions is different from the way we do. In particular, they use a SHA-1 and we use a SHA-2, partially because SHA-1 is no longer considered reliable or not super reliable. And so we can't just compare their hashes against ours. And also, the other problem is that if the way we look at it is very granular, and we'd like to look at it granular so that the database is always highly up to date. So if we ask Internet Archive every day, what are all the new things you found for this URL today? We can't, so Internet Archive doesn't have a way to say, only give me back things that are a different hash from what you previously captured. We don't have this problem with Versionista because it never captures anything if it wasn't different. It just throws it away and never even stores it to begin with. Internet Archive keeps it, and it doesn't have a way to filter. If you're asking for 5 days worth of stuff, and today's is the same as yesterday's, you can tell it to deduplicate those and only give you yesterday's. But if you're only asking for 1 day's worth of stuff, then you don't have the previous one to sort of deduplicate against. So we don't have a strategy on the side of asking IA for the data to throw out that one that we've already seen. And it's not a matter of just asking for an extra day or two, because maybe for some reason Internet Archive didn't snapshot this page since a week ago. As long as the previous version is not in the time frame we're looking for, then we're not going to be able to do that. And the more we widen the time frame, the more extraneous extra crap we get, and the more problem it is overall in terms of scale. So instead, what I'm proposing is that we should maybe have a way in the database to do, again, on the database import processing side, to filter that. So we just send it all to the database, and the database says, oh, the hash for this one is exactly the same as the hash for the most recent capture time I have immediately before it. I'm going to ignore it. There's some proposed alternatives there, which is maybe we should throw out that idea and start storing everything, and instead set a flag on it that says this is not a change. And then we only present the ones that are flagged as different from the previous in searches and everything else, but we have all the underlying data. There's reasons that might be super valuable in the far future, but it's a lot more stuff for us to hold. So trade-offs there. Any quick questions on those? Cool.
Quick questions, but I do have questions in the future.
Okay. Post them in the issue, and then we can have longer discussion there.
That sounds great. Okay. Thanks, everyone. I know we went over, so we appreciate everyone's time. And I will talk to you in Slack, GitHub, or other media until next week. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.